Right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second of our series of innovation talks, brought to you by two Easy Fairs events, PCD and PLD in Paris, and Packaging Innovations and Luxury Packaging, London. I'm Josh Brooks, Event Director for ADF and PCD and PLD Paris. Just like our face-to-face events, these online innovation talks aim to bring you inspiration and new understanding of packaging's key challenges and opportunities to help you, whether you're packaging developers, designers, or suppliers, connect with each other and create better and more innovative packaging. The digital transformation, the Internet of Things, and the data they create is transforming everything we do, from light bulbs to telephones, cars to TVs. But it has been, in some respects, relatively slow to impact the very analog interactions we tend to have with packaging. That's all changing. And today we're going to hear from Rob Hollands, Managing Director of SharpEnd, about the opportunities that the Internet of Things, when applied to packaging, brings to brands. We'll be doing a Q&A after today's talk, so please ask your questions in the question tab on the right-hand side of your screen. I will pick the best of these for Rob after the talk. And also, this webinar will be available to watch on demand after the talk is finished. So if you want to share it with your colleagues, share it with friends, you can. One final note, you can probably see a little icon of a bell at the top of your screen. I recommend you turn it off. So I'm very pleased to hand over now to Rob Hollands. Rob, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Josh. So I'm just going to fire up the presentation that we're going through today. So a quick, probably 20-minute quick fire session on connected packaging and the opportunity we see for brands to activate their most powerful owned media asset. I run our SharpEnd business, which is very much a specialist in the connected packaging and connected retail space. And I've previously owned and sold a digital business and then spent 10 years running a large global packaging business. So hopefully sit with some expertise between understanding how the digital and packaging worlds can combine. So just before we kick off, I wanted to talk a bit. Obviously, we're sat in a moment of huge change. And I'm not going to talk too much about that change today because we've all been hearing lots about that across news channels and in all sorts of thought leadership and trends pieces. But it's quite interesting to look back. Obviously, organisations like Forbes have predicted prior to what we've seen recently about the huge amount of innovation and change that we're going to see in the next decade. And I actually think that the current situation is driving that change forward at an even greater rate. And you know, we see from the World Economic Forum the amount of change that we'll see in the next 10 years will be comparable to the last 40, and I suspect that that's even gone up. And I think this is going to be truer than ever for CPG, luxury, fashion, and beauty brands, with the recent events only accelerating this drive to digitalization. And some of the brands we've been talking to talk about, yeah, but actually we can see, you know, our product innovation, our limited edition products or our actual core product innovations actually slowing down. And when you start to look at some of the data, there's an interesting piece by Warwick Business School around actually product innovation does tend to slow in kind of recession type times. Or where there's major global disruption, but actually the brand and marketing innovation tends to increase. And I think post 2009 recession, we saw a kind of 14% increase in brand innovation. So I think it's still really important to be looking at how you can innovate, perhaps more importantly than ever from a kind of brand or marketing perspective. And just to finish up on that, one thing is absolutely for sure is that the way our consumers are engaging with media has significantly changed. Those opportunities to consume out-of-home media, certainly in the last few months, has drastically changed. So to start to look at media that's still getting into the home, to explore things like connected packaging, which is still getting into the hands of the consumer, and to treat that as a new media channel is an absolutely huge opportunity for now. So our time together today, I thought we'd do a quick run through of what is that connected opportunity. I thought we could have a look at how consumers are connecting with a couple of case studies and some of the things we've been working on here. And then we'll quickly finish up with looking at how you might get to market and the potential data opportunity that sits around connected packaging. So when we talk about connected packaging, we sometimes use the term Internet of Packaging, and this all originates from the Internet of Things, which is actually, way back when, I think 1982, the first ever Internet of Things mention came around, actually in a consumer packaged goods in terms of Coca-Cola with their connected vending machine. So it's a term that's been around a while, but definitely in the last 5 to 6 years, it's become more prominent. And we've seen everything within our consumers' lives start to become connected. IBM predicted it would be 200 billion things by 2020, and we can certainly see that if you look around our lives now, whether it's through a smartwatch, whether it's a smart home appliance, a Nest, a connected toothbrush, a smart TV. Everything in our lives and our consumers' lives has started to become connected. And today, it's been largely focused on the technology. So if you look at those applications of IoT, a lot of it has been about building the technical capability or kind of getting that technology into our lives, getting it scalable. And one of the gaps that we see as an agency is there's actually been a gap in terms of the creative application. What challenge are we trying to solve creatively? What can we do to enhance the consumer experience creatively? So we somewhere sit between a kind of technology business, but with a real focus on trying to address the creative challenge. And I think the IoT space is certainly maturing. When we set about in 2015, we were the first ever agency of things, which fitted with our mission that this is a creative challenge and not a technical one. So we became the first agency of things appointed by Pernod Ricard Group as their global IoT agency. And we've seen in that time, lots and lots of things connected, whether it's the hundreds of billions of apparel items that exist, the 120 billion plus cosmetics products that sit in the world at any one point of time. But what really interests us and what we're kind of here to talk about today is packaging. And that's one of the things that interests us there is that the huge opportunity to connect. We're not talking hundreds of billions or hundreds and 20 of billions of items. We're talking about trillions of packaging touch points, which is a huge opportunity for brands. And when we talk connected packaging, what we're talking about is the opportunity to transform a physical touch point, a physical pack or product, and turn it into an owned media asset that can deliver relevant experiences, engaging content, personalized experiences into consumers, into our consumers' lives. And there's absolutely loads of data out there. This is obviously still an emerging industry. We're getting more and more data all of the time, and I think there'll be some huge proof points in the next 6 to 12 months, some of which I'll talk about as we go through today. But we can see, when we're talking about provenance, there's a real demand for consumers to get more information. I think more than ever before, that transparency, where did my product come from? Where is it going? We'll see increased demand there. We're seeing some statistics like 75% of consumers will switch brands that are giving them more information than they can get from the physical label. We know that consumers want to connect for relevant experiences, and ultimately they want more than they can get from their current packaging. The kind of opportunities that we can look at when we're looking at connected technologies broadly switch into three kind of areas. So we've got the opportunity for things like augmented reality, and we'll see huge growth there over the coming years. There's a 30% year-on-year growth in the application of AR technology. We've got the opportunity to use things like code, and we'll talk a bit about that. And where we also have some deep expertise is in more frictionless technology like NFC, the ability to build some technology into a product or a pack that allows you to simply tap your device and gain an experience or some kind of communication from just a tap. So just to look, to unpack these three areas slightly, we'll run through a couple of examples of them in action. Lush is a really interesting one for me, because it's addressing a genuine use case from an image recognition or an augmenting content type perspective. And they launched their Lush lens across a number of their stores, both in kind of pop-up lab type stores initially, as part of a prototype, right the way out to pilot and scale, and now appearing across many of their stores. And this really is a great example of augmented reality or image type recognition. They've unpacked a number of their products. They've identified a genuine friction point, which is, consumers want to see less packaging around their products. We're going to do everything we can to take away that packaging. However, that leaves us with a gap. We need to tell people how to use the product, what the value of that product is, all sorts of information around there, that if we take away the current packaging, how are we going to do that? So they've used some fantastic technology, actually uses Google's image recognition engine, an AI platform, to be able to recognize their products, to deliver all of that information back to the consumer, whether that's ingredients information, where the product's been through the supply chain, or simple how to use or brand building type messaging. You can do that through a scan of the product. So a lovely, genuine use case of connected packaging, or connected products, perhaps more in this case, in action. Now, there's loads of other things you can do with image recognition and AR. I've talked lots before about the work that's done by Treasury Wines and 19 Crimes, where you can deliver just more kind of engaging brand storytelling type content, not necessarily addressing a deep user need. And I pop this in here because last week people will be familiar with the 19 Crimes work they've done in the past. This is their next iteration of augmented reality wine bottles, where they're doing a tie-up with Snoop Dogg to launch their Cali Red, which will bring that artist to life from the pack. But a good example, they've used this technology and this innovation to build the fastest growing wine brand of all time, to launch in multiple markets, to deliver multi-million downloads of their experience and engagements with their content across all sorts of channels, without the use of traditional media, which, as I said before, is going to become more and more important. So they haven't gone out on TV. They haven't run particularly big social campaigns. They have activated this whole product and this whole launch directly from the pack, and using connected packaging. So then we can look into what always is the slightly contentious one in terms of QR codes. And we often hear this, I think we published an article a number of years ago which talked about QR codes being dead, but we've certainly seen a resurgence, and there's lots of reasons for that. They've obviously been big in other markets, but particularly in Europe, over the last year or two, there's been lots of change there, and I'll talk slightly through that. But back to the original deployment of QR codes, we made some pretty big mistakes, and I think brands and agencies are probably guilty at this, but we kind of scattergunned QR codes out into the market. We had this simple piece of technology, relatively low cost. We slapped it all over the place. We deployed those codes at will. We didn't tell anyone how to use them back in, I'm thinking, kind of 2013, even back in 2010 when QR codes really launched. We made you download a horrible app. And once you'd eventually gone through that process, we often took you through to a really unrewarding experience. We dropped you into a often not mobile optimized Unilever.com or kraftheinz.com, the kind of websites that our consumers wouldn't have visited out of choice at any point. Perhaps other stakeholders in those groups would, but certainly not consumers. We didn't drop them into a relevant experience. However, when we look to other markets, and people will be familiar with this, you look to Asia, you look to China, and actually there's a huge amount going on with QR codes in those markets. We often recommend, if you do a store visit at any point, certainly once things get out of lockdown, pop down to Chinatown in whichever market you're in, and just have a look in one of the stores there, and you'll see the amount of QR codes deployed onto products there, and they're making money for brands. Huge amount of transactions, almost $2 trillion going through QR in China. And so what's changed in our European markets? Well, one of the big things, I talked about these spam-filled apps. Well, a couple of years ago, we Apple was resisted building QR codes into its natively readable QR codes into its platform. All of a sudden at one of their World Developer Conferences, they announced actually this is going natively into the camera. And we really can't underestimate when one of the technology platforms like Apple makes that kind of change. It has an instant impact on the market. So we saw in the States a 30% increase in the number of QR codes being deployed into those markets and engaged with. And the same across other kind of Western markets. So that was the big significant change for QR codes. The other thing is we by that time had almost 5 years of other platforms educating consumers about how to use code. So you think something like Snap Code, probably most famous originally for being deployed onto bottles of Evian. And all bottles of Evian at one point. The Snap codes on there have educated consumers that if you see some kind of marker, you can point your device at it and get something back, ideally a fantastic and relevant, timely experience with a brand. And we've seen lots of examples of this being deployed recently. We've seen PepsiCo in the US at Christmas launch its Gift It Forward campaign, which allowed you to scan the pack of PepsiCo that you'd bought, match or get a winning product, and then be able to gift that gift forward. So really lovely use of QR for those guys. We've also seen Haribo, currently live in the market, launch their biggest ever unpack promotion using QR codes for a simple kind of win type mechanic. And this year we're about to announce, which unfortunately timings haven't worked out to announce it today, but we're about to announce 100 million unique QR codes launching for a big European FMCG brand this year, which will be a huge, again, education piece for consumers, delivering a super relevant, personalized experience. And then finally, one of the other options we've got for connectivity and where we have lots of experience here is with NFC technology. So this self-powered chip that can be woven into the fabric of the packaging or the label, and allows the consumer to tap to gain that experience. And really similar to QR codes, the big change that's been happening there is year on year, we've seen since 2018 when Apple natively built this in without an app into the device, we've seen year on year Apple unlock this technology further, so that now on the most recent devices, it's a totally native, switched on experience. So you can take your device, tap, and get that experience straight back in a frictionless way. And we've done lots of work in this space. So we're probably most famous for the work with Malibu, where we deployed a 40,000 bottle trial, taking it right the way through a much larger scale in scale out in multiple markets. And more recently for our work with Bowen Wines, which I'm just going to talk through some of the learnings that we've had from this project. So this was 1 million NFC enabled bottles launched into the US market at the end of last year. And we set about with Bowen. There's lots of reasons that you explore doing connected packaging. There's a fantastic data opportunity. There's a way to use your media spend in a more optimized way and treat it as an owned media channel. It can deliver great experiences to the consumer. And we wanted to do all of that with Bowen. But we also wanted to position them as a really innovative brand. And we ultimately wanted to create the most digitally connected, advanced wine brand that the world has ever seen. This is the kind of mission we set about with them. And we've certainly taken the first steps on that journey. So you get an idea of the experience that we've developed here. On that first tap experience, you get a lovely build-up of the product come to life. You can then go and explore what we've called the farmhouse, whether that's finding out information about the winemaker, Joe Wagner, sharing content with your friends and uploading content, or creating your virtual wine rack. So the ability to tap multiple Bowen products, build this virtual wine rack, have your tasting notes around that, and get all sorts of information is absolutely fantastic. But also a huge opportunity for the brand to understand which products people are using, which products they're consuming, and what they're out of the whole brand portfolio, what products the consumer has from that portfolio. And we've seen some great data here. So we've talked about this in the past, but we see anywhere between a 5 and 15, 20% scan rate. So this is the first big metric, which I think is huge. So you imagine of your products that you launch into market, this powerful owned media channel, of any of those products that we connect and put out to market, we'll see something like we've seen on Bowen here, which is 13% of all of those products have been scanned or interacted with. And then the other really exciting insight, which we've seen across multiple campaigns that we've done, is anywhere between 30 and 50% of those products that are engaged with will then see that consumer go on to give us their first party data, which is what we're calling an engagement here. So that's really interesting, right? That's of my products that I can put out there, 5 to 20% of them will be tapped or scanned, and I can deliver a fantastic brand experience. But then of those taps or scans, half of those consumers will go on to give me some of their data so that I can follow up, so that I can communicate in the future, but also that I can better understand who's buying and using my product. And that's one of the big opportunities for us with connected packaging, is the ability to get to who's buying and using my product. And we'll talk about that in a moment. I wanted to just draw on some of the other data that we've seen with Bowen. So this is a fantastic one for us because it's live in the market now. It's been live during the last few months when we've seen this change in consumers' consumption behaviours, in the way that they consume media, in the way that they buy and use products. When we've seen some really interesting data here, the first data point that I've pulled out is that we've actually seen an increase in taps just overall. So post-lockdown versus pre-lockdown, we've seen almost a 30% increase in the number of taps that are going on. Same amount of products in the market, but an increase in the taps. So that was the first interesting one for us. And then, I mean, it's probably not a big jump to get to that actually, once consumers are tapping, they're spending almost double the amount of time engaging in the platform. The same platform that we were running before, consumers are just spending more time enjoying this media in the home environment. And I think this is something we're going to see. I'm sure this will decrease slightly as we see people going out and consuming media out of home again. But I think that certainly the home and the opportunity for connected products and connected packaging has grown. We're seeing higher engagement rates and then the length of that engagement increasing as well. So I wanted to talk a bit about how we then get to the market. And I'm not one for talking too much about the agency, but there is obviously a great opportunity to work with specialist agencies and partners, as well as the whole ecosystem of existing partners. And as I said, we set about in 2015, really on a mission which we've refined, but ultimately we see the real world as a physical platform. And we see a huge opportunity to look at connecting the physical touch points in that real world to bring brands and consumers closer together. And obviously packaging, retail as well, are great physical touch points to utilize. We work with a number of fantastic brands. There's 25 of us. We're based primarily in London, but we also operate across the US market, and increasingly so. We manage a number of innovation labs, and we've been connecting lots of objects since we started up, and we'll see this year that number absolutely grow. We follow a process, and I'm going to talk a bit about how we get something to market. But one of the things we're big believers in is getting stuff rapidly out there. The prototype mentality of actually don't get too hung up on those technology choices I've talked about. Prototype, test, learn. It may be that we, identify one particular technology stream as being right, but actually the way that consumers want to interact with us is very different. Maybe we want to position ourselves as extremely innovative and make a technology choice, or maybe this is all about scale at lower cost. And that dictates a technology choice. But ultimately, the best thing to do is to get a prototype out into the hands of the stakeholders, launch something, track it, use the data and measurement platforms and all of that great data we can get back to refine before piloting and scaling. And there's a couple of areas we look at broadly when we're thinking about what we can do with connected packaging. So the first and obvious one, in store, and we know the way that consumers engage in stores is certainly going to change, but experience within retail will still become really important. It probably brings that experience at point of purchase up in the order of priorities. The commodity type shopping and purchases might be done in a different way. That might be more online, but certainly when we want to have an experience, when we want to have a moment to choose, to to be educated, to engage more with products, that experience is going to happen in stores as well. So this is about, how do I use my connected products? How do I enable my packaging to engage consumers at point of sale? And that might be to talk about provenance or transparency, or to deliver brand stories and messaging, to deliver offers, deliver loyalty. There's lots of different use cases that will be specific to the brand and consumer needs. And then we've already talked about it, but when I'm out of that store or when I'm at home, how do I engage consumers post-purchase? And this is probably the really big opportunity, and the big opportunity to scale for brands. And I think you can start to look at it when we talk about scale for connected packaging. You can almost look at this as packaging as a service, the ability to create that one experience, to use technology to dynamically adapt it to your consumers, but to really be able to deliver that at scale. I think that's really a great opportunity to elevate those moments in the home. And that totally requires what I talked about before. This is far less about the technology and much more about the creative opportunity. What can I do to elevate the experience in the home, in that consumption moment, using creativity? I've talked a bit about prototyping. So a big area for us is just get prototypes out there, just test and learn with stakeholders initially, small consumer groups, before piloting and scaling those rollouts. And one of the other big areas to look at, and we see this a lot, is about the ability to inspire the supply chain, particularly for any brands on the call today. I'd say this is really an inspiring space. Your brand design agencies will be interested to look at how they can elevate the story and the messaging that they're developing on packaging, and elevate that beyond the pack. Within the supply chain, printers, converters, product manufacturers are all really interested to look at what's the future of their business as well, and how can they support in this new opportunity to engage with consumers in a different way. So absolutely inspire the supply chain. I think we see very few barriers when we're deploying connected packaging campaigns, once everyone's engaged and knows where we're going. And then we've talked, so you can see this live as some of our Boeing caps being dynamically printed and encoded with their NFC tags there. And as I said before, we've had huge success here, but absolutely pilot, smaller scale pilots to get products out there, minimize the investment and the upfront costs, test and learn ahead of full scale deployments. And we've had great success there with Jameson's, where we've deployed a number of smaller scale pilots ahead of them doing a much bigger scaled rollout last year. Bulgari, so luxury brands, in terms of their Serpenti range of handbags, from pilot stage to larger scale rollout. And obviously we've talked a bit about Malibu. So just to finish up, possibly with the biggest opportunity of all, is to say we've seen lots of examples of connected packaging in the past where it's a very tactical, short-term piece of content, but I think it's really important. This isn't a tactical one-off promotion, and you shouldn't think about connected packaging in that way. This is a huge opportunity to change the future of the business, to react to the changes that are happening in the marketplace. And we've seen digital transformation across lots of industries. I think the CPG, FMCG, luxury brands are in a point now where this is being expedited. We're having to transform our businesses digitally, and connected packaging provides a huge opportunity. And part of the reason for that is that there's other competitors in the marketplace that are also racing this down. And I use this example. You could pick hundreds of different examples. This is Amazon's gin that they launched at Christmas. I think they have almost 30,000 of their own products now across 111 brands, Amazon-owned brands and products. But this is their gin that they launched at Christmas. And you can see here, the Amazon is one of those organizations that does have the data. They do potentially know who's using their product. They do know who's purchasing it. And in order for other brands to keep up, we're going to have to build some of those data layers into our products. And connected packaging allows us to do that. It allows us to be data driven. It allows us to see who's buying and consuming our products. And then it allows us to build new services, whether that's direct to consumer or additional experiences and service type content around that packaged product. And there's lots of ways to do that. We have an IoT style platform called the IO.TT, which allows us to, whether it's QR, NFC or short URLs, build those identities and then manage those identities at scale, deliver dynamic experiences. And then we get all of that fantastic data back, which I've talked about. And it also starts to give us the ability to see what's going on across products and leverage new consumer insights across that entire value chain. And of course, with connected packaging, just like the early days of digital, we finally get a way to rapidly measure and understand how those products are performing. You know, some simple metrics here that we can very easily measure, whether that's number of scans, how long consumers are engaging with us, their repeat engagement, or how much data they're sharing. They're very simple metrics. And of course, there's thousands of data points we're able to connect when we start to enable our packaging. So to finish up, hopefully roughly on time, just for a quick summary, the first is we talked about at the start. You know, this is the time. If you haven't been looking at the opportunity to enable your packaging and your products, I think this is definitely the time. We can see the consumer demand for it more than ever. Consumers want to connect. This is an owned media channel for brands out there and your media budgets. I'd say absolutely be looking at that media budget. Treat this as your own type of media and look at ways you can drive spend efficiencies, more targeted spend, but also own this media channel. We've talked about it being an absolute must-win time for new capabilities. So look at this as a way of building these new capabilities into your product and your organization. And just to finish up, don't build big barriers to get stuff to market. Test and learn, prototype, get things into the hands of your stakeholders, understand how this technology works rapidly, ahead of pilot, learning, and then scaling. And that's it for me. Thank you for your time and listening today.
Rob, thank you so much. That was awesome and a brilliant sort of, if I could put it this way, you know, and I think about this in terms of how I think, an idiot's guide to what connected packaging is all about. So that's absolutely perfect and what we were looking for, and on time. So thank you.
Great. Apologies to any experts out there.
No. No, I'm teasing, of course. I'm teasing. So we've had a few questions come in, particularly around the Bowen example that you talked about, which is really interesting. So we had a question. I'm not going to look up who it was from, but did the tap on the NFC, so sort of specific thing, did the tap on that lead to a website or an app? What's the journey there for the user?
So we're really big fans of making it as frictionless a user experience as possible, which is why I've been massively excited about the amount of work going on with Web AR, which obviously for the first time takes away the need for an app when you're engaging with AR type content. And absolutely, Bowen was exactly that. Whilst it was made to feel perhaps more of an appy type experience, it was a fully web-based appless experience. So you tapped the cap, you went through to a fantastic experience, no app download, and actually there was lots of dynamic stuff, or there is lots of dynamic stuff going on there. So on second tap, that experience changes. Once you start adding multiple products into your wine cellar, the experience changes. So yeah, there's lots going on there, but all fully appless.
Okay, cool. And it was really interesting that you said that since the lockdowns began, there's been a massive uptick in engagement. What do you think that's down to?
I think there's from it's obviously more personal experience, but I think consumers are spending more time engaging with the products that are in their life for definite. I think we've placed higher value on those products coming into our lives. But I think probably the biggest thing is that our headspace has been slightly cleared. We're not consuming all of the media we might have on our journeys to work and in other ways. So we're consuming that media directly, or we're looking for other ways to consume that. You know, radio, I think, has had a huge resurgence. I imagine things like potentially like pre-roll to online advertising has, and I think connected packaging is exactly the same there. I think we will continue to see that. I think if brands can find a genuine way, a human way, to deliver content to consumers via the pack of the product, I think we'll only see the engagement rates go up.
Yeah, and one thing that struck me as you were talking a little bit earlier about QR codes is I wonder if in the aftermath of the coronavirus we're going to see more of this sort of technology, particularly around QR codes, because it's touchless.
Absolutely.
And in the shops, you just don't have to touch the product.
Yeah, we're looking. I mentioned I've obviously focused today on our specialist area around connected packaging, but we're also doing a huge amount of work with connected retail, and QR codes across Europe will play an increased part there, whether it's being able to trigger virtual try-ons or dynamic add to baskets or helping with payment as it does in lots of other markets. I think we'll certainly see that there, and that will only help with the case for QR on packaging. Okay.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. We have to ask a COVID-19 question, and that was it.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in the data that's being collected. Tell us a bit more about what data is being collected and what brands are doing with it. And if we could start with a question that one of our attendees asked, which is, what are the GDPR implications, if any?
So I guess hit the GDPR one quickly. We have to be GDPR compliant. In some of the markets we're operating in, we perhaps don't, or it's slightly different legislation there. But GDPR sits as the absolute benchmark for data compliance. All of our projects fit that. And you kind of have to treat it in the same way you would do building a web experience or any other digital experience. It has to be compliant. We often get asked the question about, is my NFC tag in my connected wine bottle tracking me? And of course, it isn't doing that stuff. It's a user-initiated connection. And then if we collect data, we require the relevant opt-ins. So hopefully that loosely addresses the GDPR compliance side of things, exactly the same considerations as brands would have with any of their other digital activity. In terms of the data question, we kind of split data into two areas. The more standard analytics that we collect, so that would be things like number of taps, potentially location of tap, the duration of the engagement, the frequency. So on average, we see 2.6 taps, for example, on Bowen. So consumers are tapping more than once. All of that data we treat as analytics. The browsers that they're using, the device information, the sort of stuff that you might get from a web experience. And then we build what we call dashboards, which sit much more in the relevant brand information. So which of my products are being engaged with, what's my most popular product, might look more at things like time of day and trends around those engagements. Which of my stores are having my products tapped within them at point of sale, rough geolocations of consumers. Are we seeing taps across multiple products or products in different categories? So that's what we would build more specifically to the client's requirement, and we would call that a dashboard. But there's a huge amount of data.
Okay. We've got a question that I'm just looking at from Anne-Marie Schulman. So Anne-Marie, hello. Could you tell us a little bit more about some of the more sort of luxury positions, some of the products in the luxury market that you have worked with, or use cases? You mentioned Bulgari at one point.
So we're working with a number of fashion brands for all sorts of different use cases. So some of it's brand storytelling orientated. There's some interesting projects around understanding the supply chain and more about provenance, I suppose. We're looking at the reuse of fashion and luxury, so the ability to kind of pass that product on, or looking at things like subscription services or rental type programs with fashion, to activating collabs. There's a really interesting use case which we're exploring about the kind of second life of fashion, because lots of brands out there have a huge second life value and are passed down multiple times. You look at Burberry jacket, for example. That first consumer is only one part of that product's journey. So it's interesting, once you start to build technology in, you can almost build that birth certificate, or car handbook would be the wrong terminology for the luxury sector, but I suppose the ability to track that product beyond, as well as educating, bringing brand stories to life, bringing the design inspiration to life, the fabrics, the materials. There's lots of opportunity there.
Interesting. Okay. And thinking about how brands in different sort of positions in the market, whether they're mainstream everyday, whether they're premium, whether they're luxury, what are, broadly speaking, the cost implications of AR versus QR versus NFC? Without putting numbers on it, I imagine NFC per unit is the most expensive of the three, or am I wrong? No,
you're exactly right. From a purely kind of deployment of the technology, QR is going to be a lower cost one. The technology cost is kind of one thing. The bigger cost is, okay, what's going to be my experience? Is it an always on? Is it a long-term connected packaging platform? And that's where you really need to consider the investment behind these types of activities. It's creating that amazing, unique, super relevant, highly valuable experience for the consumer. You certainly you probably wouldn't deploy NFC onto a KitKat bar. You might actually, we have had a brief on a lower cost FMCG kind of consume and dispose type product, where actually NFC might be the thing to drive real innovation amongst their consumers, and there's a high value exchange, and it's not seen as a cost per unit, it's seen much more as a marketing and PR investment. But loosely, you'd be right. If it's a lower cost, highly scaled product, you might be considering QR versus a more luxury, longer lifespan product where NFC would probably be, you'd be able to justify the cost of that.
Okay, cool. Just two more questions. Of course, we have to have a sustainability question. We wouldn't be talking about packaging if we weren't talking about sustainability. What are the implications, if any, and I guess it's particularly relevant to NFC, is there a recycling challenge around that? What are the implications there?
Well, we're really lucky here because we work with lots of fantastic experts in the production of NFC tags, in the considerations around printing unique QR codes, all of those things. And there's been some huge progress. So there's not usually a challenge. We're also doing the other question we get a lot, particularly from fashion brands, and we've done a huge amount of research work with our partners on, is washability, dry cleanability, how much battering these tags can take. And we've successfully overcome all of those challenges. And there is minor considerations for sustainability, but a lot of that has been addressed. The actual technology going into these things is really negligible when it comes to the disposal of them.
Okay.
There's all sorts of green options. So there's really we're not seeing any barriers to implementation from a sustainability consideration or any other. And actually, I think one thing we haven't touched on today is the role that connected packaging can play in terms of the circular economy and sustainability. And we also have lots of briefs there around, we've got a massive job to do to educate consumers. We've done some work with Unilever on how do I dispose of this product based on my exact location or my borough. So I think there's a huge opportunity for this to play in sustainability as well.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, cool. My last question, because we're running out of time as well, and we could talk all afternoon, but you talked a lot about prototypes and, we start here of fail fast or, get the minimum viable product out there and do what you can and see what happens. What is a typical lead time or what's your time to market on your quickest?
I mean, we have stuff to market is a tricky one, but certainly to prototype in weeks, not months. The consideration often is much more around the client supply chain, and we've got a whole part of the business working in that space to help clients implement this into the supply chain. And we're working with printers and we're working with people on the lines to get the technology into there. So I think certainly for prototype and usually for pilot, the lead times are minimal. Perhaps prototype, you could say it's a 4-week cycle. Perhaps when we start to look at pilot, we might be 1 to 3 month cycle. When you start to go and scale, there's a bit more consideration around how do we get this at scale into the supply chain. But again, those barriers, we've got lots of learnings there. There's lots of learnings in the marketplace. And I mentioned it, I think the whole supply chain is excited to invest their time and make these things move, because it's, this is part of the future. Printers don't want to be, they're not going to still be printing in the same way that they are now in the future. They need to be moving into being more data orientated businesses, to be delivering more dynamic print, all of that good stuff, I'm sure. And this is one of those areas that can help them do that.
Cool. Awesome. Okay. We're running out of time, and I wish, like I said, that we could speak for longer, but we've promised 40 to 45 minutes to everybody. We're 44 minutes in. So, Rob, thank you so much. It's so interesting. It wasn't an idiot's guide at all. It was fascinating, and we went far beyond. We went far beyond that. So, thank you, Rob, for all the insights and information. Everybody, feel free to connect with Rob. I'm sure you can find him on LinkedIn, or through the Sharpend website, which is wearesharpend.com.
Yep, perfect. Yeah, find us on LinkedIn. Give us a shout. We're really happy to have chats. We're on a mission to help move the industry forward as well. So we're not all about making money. We're here to help drive this forward. So yeah, please give us a shout.
Cool, awesome. Well, listen, exciting times ahead. And we will be back, I hope, next week with our next installment. We're just working on who might be speaking, but I'm going to be communicating that later in the week. In the meantime, everybody, have a fantastic week. Keep doing what you're doing, whether you're at home, in the office, in the factory, in the park, wherever you might be. Good luck, stay safe, and we will see you very soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Phil.